Hey there, Rednecks, Preppies, Redneck Preppies. It's me, the Redneck Preppy. How you doing today? Great, good. We are back with the Kodiak Defence WK-180C rifle. Recently, I crossed the 2,000 round mark with the rifle, so I figured that it would make for a tidy conclusion to the review series that began all the way back in July 2021. There are links in the description below if you want to watch the other 3 parts. So yes, this is the final video that I'm going to do on this rifle, though I'm fairly certain it'll appear in other videos. Now, I'm basically going to go over everything with this rifle that I've experienced over the past 9 or so months. So if you've watched the earlier videos, a lot of this stuff is going to be repetitive to you and you can skip to the end. There should be a timestamp on the screen to where that is. But if you haven't watched those other editions, this video will probably suffice in giving you the kit and caboodle of my thoughts on the 180C. So if this is your first time in the series, the WK-180C by Kodiak Defence is essentially a Canadian-made AR-180B, a semi-automatic rifle based on the Armalite AR-18. Although you can get it for a bit cheaper, the MSRP for this rifle is $1,250 Canadian, or about $1,000 US. For Americans, you have to remember that firearms do cost more in Canada, particularly non-restricted modern sporting rifles. We call it the non-restricted tax up here. It's likely that you can buy this cheaper than $1,000 in the US. I know it's for sale at many stores in Canada, so you won't have a problem obtaining one. I am not up to speed where you can get it in the United States, though. It's a semi-automatic rifle with a short-stroke gas piston system. It weighs about 7.25 pounds unloaded, and it is, as I mentioned, chambered in .223 Remington and 5.56 millimeters. The chrome moly lined free float barrel has a 1 1/8 twist rate. It's 18.7 inches in length without and 19.9 inches with the A2 birdcage flash hider installed. That flash hider can be removed. The rifle itself is about 39 inches with the buttstock fully extended, about 32 inches at its most compact. The body of the upper and lower are both made out of 6061 T6 aircraft grade aluminum and has a black hard coat anodized class 3 finish on it. You've got yourself an M1913 Picatinny rail along the top of much of the rifle, and the foregrip also has M-LOK attachment points. Now it does share minor parts with the AR-15, most notably the trigger pack, but outside of that there isn't much outside that you can swap. It does take your typical Stanag pattern magazines, and it does not come with sights. So as I've usually done with these videos, a quick update on the rifle since the last video. I haven't noticed anything with the rifle through use, either over the past 1,000 rounds since the last review, nor in the total 2,000 rounds I put through it. Now, 2 key metrics that most people care about when it comes to firearms is reliability and accuracy. No changes in reliability since the last video in October 2021. This thing has ticked like a Rolex. No failures, it just works. It feeds properly with the Stanag magazines I've used through it. It didn't like the Beowulf magazines that a friend loaned me. As for functioning, the rifle has never failed to work. No issues with extraction or cycling, even one time over 2,000 rounds. Now that's not John Browning's 20,000 round test of his M1917 Browning machine gun, so it's worth what you think it is. Now as for accuracy, no changes the wrong way, which can happen. I did manage to get it to 2 MOA. I know, I sound like I broke new ground for a semi-automatic .223 Remington chambered rifle. I'm still working on loads to tighten to 1.5 MOA, which has been my ultimate goal with this rifle. I recently started experimenting with 62 grain bullets, which I thought might be the key after some okay-ish results with 55 grain bullets. A recent range trip, though, gave me some very surprising results with 55 grain bullets. That is, the tightest groups I've ever seen with this rifle. So I'm still kind of trying to figure out what to do. Either way, I have shown that this is at least a 2 MOA rifle, and that if I'm not drinking a bucket of coffee before I go shooting, I can go sub 1 MOA with it. I think with better hand loads and a shooter behind the trigger, the WK-180C can reliably go 1.5 MOA. If you've been following along with the previous videos, my WK-180C is no longer stock. No huge game-changing modifications, but in the interests of completeness, not to mention a lot of you out there have messaged me about where to get some of the products I've used, I'll report them here. Now, there's not going to be any links to the products themselves because YouTube really doesn't like that sort of thing. So if you do have some questions as to where to get some of the stuff that I put on my rifle, just send me an email through the email link that's in the About section on the YouTube channel, or go to my Facebook or Instagram pages and just send me a DM. Now, the rifle came with the standard parts bin AR-15 buttstock, which I eventually swapped out for a Magpul CTR carbine stock. The big advantage of this stock is that it locks down and minimizes rattle. The WK-180C doesn't come with a brass deflector, which annoys some people, justifiably I think. So I initially had installed a 3D printed version, which eventually broke until I went with this aluminum model. The stock trigger is your typical AR-15 style, and it comes with a 7 to 8 pound pull. I hated it, as I tend to hate all stock AR triggers. So I installed a Trigger Tech adaptable 2 to 5 pound trigger, which sadly came from my now prohibited AR-15. This made a pretty big difference when it came to group shooting, not surprisingly perhaps. I made no secret of my dislike for the stock charging handle, which I considered to be too small and potentially fragile over time. So I picked up this larger and thicker charging handle. It has the same problem of needing to be screwed in, with the resulting issue of it potentially coming loose. But because it is a larger handle, you can put more force on it to tighten it. So there is that. The rifle doesn't come with a forward sling attachment point, so I added my own Magpul M-Lock sling attachment. Finally, as the rifle doesn't come with iron sights, you do need to add some sort of either iron sights or an optic. I initially had a cheap UTG Bug Blaster scope on this. That's all I had lying around the parts bin. But a few months ago, I upgraded to this Vortex Strike Eagle 1:8 by 24 LPVO. It's a budget optic as LPVOs go, yes, but for range trips it works just fine. Now, I don't see any further changes for this rifle with the possible exception of a new scope mount. The setup I have works just fine, but it looks a little boomerish, so I might pick up one of them sexy tactical mounts that all the gun kids are rocking these days. Despite those changes, there are some things that I haven't fixed yet, maybe, and wish that Kodiak Defence had made different design choices. None of these are earth-shaking, but I am kind of a details guy. The first is the front hinge pin that isn't like your typical AR-15 front hinge pin. Rather, it's a pin that's held in place with a C-clip. For a lot of applications, C-clips are just fine, but for something like this, with all due respect to Kodiak Defence, I thought it was plain dumb. In order to fully separate the upper and the lower, I have to remove a tiny C-clip to take the pin out. It's a pain in the ass. I also wish the rifle had come with a bolt release and bolt hold open. I realize that I'm demanding AR-15 features on what is essentially an AR-180B rifle. Maybe unfair, but it's my review. Features like that would have made this rifle more useful to 2 and 3 gun shooters in Canada. And yes, I know you can buy the parts to replace the front hinge pin and add a bolt release and hold open, but why do I gotta spend more money to add what I consider to be basic functionality? That said, I was in regular contact with Kodiak to ask questions during the review process, and I brought up some of these missing features and why I thought they should add them to the rifle. Their answer was illuminating. It would involve resubmitting the receiver to the RCMP for certification, because in Canada, even the minutest change to a receiver essentially makes that into a new firearm, and then in order to sell it legally in Canada, the RCMP must certify it. That is a process that can take years here. Yes, but Kodiak sells aftermarket bolt release kits, and other companies sell replacement front hinge pins that are Chicago-style screws. That doesn't involve making changes to the receiver, just a couple of parts. So, At any rate, time for pros and cons. Usually I start with pros, but today I'm actually going to pull a George Costanza and do the opposite. Now, some of these are going to be considered niggling complaints by you, but I paid for the rifle, so the complaints are valid to me. The stock trigger is AR awful. It's fine for most kinds of shooting, stuff like 2 and 3 gun, shooting steel at the range, perhaps even hunting if you want to use the WK-180C for that. But if you want to force this rifle into a bench shooting situation, I would really think about an aftermarket trigger. The lack of a manual bolt hold, open, and release. I've already beat that to death. I'm not going to get into it again. Not having a brass deflector seems kind of odd. Purists, I know, are going to say that AR-180Bs and AR-18s didn't come with them, but they also didn't come with Magpul furniture like mine did. Adding some modern features on an old design, particularly when you're already doing it, kind of should have been an obvious move. The same with the lack of a forward sling attachment point. The buttstock actually comes with an attachment point, the stock one, but you don't have one in the front. I don't get it. The stock charging handle isn't great either. Again, it's pretty much the same as the AR-180B's charging handle. It just seems like it'll break as you vainly try and tighten it so that it doesn't eventually come loose, as it often did while I was firing. Finally, I don't like the fact that the takedown process to separate the upper and the lower removes that, tiny C-clip that I've been complaining about to take the pin out that holds the two halves together. Also, you need to remove the charging handle to take the bolt carrier out, meaning if you lock tight the charging handle to keep it from loosening, you have the fun of breaking that lock just to clean the internals. So, it is what it is. Now, all that negativity aside, let's get to the positive side of that ledger. I found this rifle to be astoundingly reliable. I had a few instances of failure to feed rounds, but all of those were magazine related. Outside of that, I never had a single reliability issue with the WK-180C. Now, I didn't do an old school AK Operators Union torture test on the rifle, so I can't comment on how well it runs after being at the bottom of a swamp for a few days, but while I used it, it was rock solid. Now, related to that, I suppose, is build quality, which I found to be pretty good. I did notice in my initial video that the two sections of pick rail on the top of the rifle that are divided by the hinge were slightly canted compared to each other. Slightly out of line, and there's a picture online on the screen right now to show that. But it didn't affect the mounting of an optic. It might be different when mounting iron sights, but I'd be pretty surprised if it did. At any rate, outside of that, I found no manufacturing defects or material shortcuts. Now, early rifles in the Gen 1 did have a problem with the bolt carrier due to heat treating issues, but I haven't heard anything about that in years, and the problem seems to have been very limited and solved fairly quickly. I do like the fact that it has an ambidextrous safety. I am a writer, but I got these weird thumbs that generally don't reach AR safeties, and this rifle's left side safety. I can operate it with my index finger on the right side of the rifle, so that's cool. The free floating barrel is a very nice touch. The WK-180C isn't a one ragged hole rifle, but anything that helps accuracy is always appreciated. Speaking of accuracy, when I talked to the company, I asked them what they expected the accuracy to be, and not surprisingly, they didn't really want to pin themselves down to an answer for what is essentially a civvy version of a service rifle. And they said that 3 to 4 MOA was achievable.
Since then, I've been on a bit of a mission to find out how far I can push the rifle, and without much effort, my hand loads, I've shot sub 2 MOA regularly and sub 1 MOA on a few occasions. Now granted, I suck as a shooter, but I've actually been averaging about 2 MOA overall with the rifle. I can probably get that down to 1.5 MOA fairly reliably. Now, I consider this a pro despite the fact that many decent AR-15s can outshoot this rifle, but I live in a country where my AR-15 is sitting in my safe waiting for a government-mandated buyback, so I don't really care. I suppose it's that time that I actually make my final recommendations on this rifle, and I'm going to answer that question this way. Knowing all that I know, would I buy this rifle in 2021 again? Yes. Would I buy this rifle today? Probably. And here's why. Since the last entry in this series last year, Kodiak Defence has actually released a Gen 2 model of the WK-180C, which introduces a few things I wish had been on this Gen 1 model. The Gen 2 has a narrow receiver, a non-reciprocating bolt handle, an external bolt catch, and an AR-15 cross pin. Also, the safety selector is no longer proprietary to this rifle, so I'm assuming they're using an AR-15 safety. These new features do come with a price hike. Gen 2 runs at 1,574 Canadian compared to 1,250 Canadian for the Gen 1. I don't know if these new features are worth an extra $324 Canadian. That's a choice that you're going to have to make. They're still selling these Gen 1 rifles both on Kodiak's website and in stores, so you can go either way. And I'm sure there's going to be used Gen 1s selling from people upgrading to Gen 2, so you might even be able to save more. So, cute answer to open up this section aside, do I recommend this rifle? Assuming that the two generations have the same reliability and accuracy, yes, I do actually recommend this rifle, though I will only speak with authority on the Gen 1 version. During my 9 months of ownership, I've really enjoyed shooting it, pushing it in terms of accuracy, and I found it to be extremely reliable. It's not an AR-15, and I'll be honest in saying that that platform is superior to the AR-180B. I think, however, it fills kind of that same space very nicely for us Canadians who can't legally shoot AR-15s any longer, and for Americans maybe just looking for something a little bit different. Short version, thumbs up on the WK-180C by Kodiak Defence. At any rate, that's it for the review series for this rifle. I hope you found it informative and that you enjoyed it. Judging by the view counts, a lot of people were at least interested in learning more about it, and thank you to all of you who followed along. As always, I hope all of your sport shooting is tight groups and constant gong hits. Take care, and bye-bye.